everybody. Welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, produced by the Wadena County Historical Society and Travel and Storyseller in collaboration with the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. BookEnds is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Five Wings Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. BookEnds programs from previous authors are now available on the website of the Wadena County Historical Society at www.wadenacountyhistory.org. Today's program will also be available on the website shortly. Next month's BookEnds will be held Saturday, February 11th, 2023 at 11:30 via Zoom and will feature Marcy Rendon, author of Sinister Graves. This month, Maren Cooper will talk about her most recent book, Finding Grace, which was published in 2022. She grew up in the Midwest and now resides in Minnesota. She currently serves as a volunteer for various nonprofits. She retreats frequently to the shores of Lake Superior, where she loves to hike and watch the deer devour her hosta. If you have questions for today's author, feel free to enter them through the chat. Now let's welcome to BookEnds Online Edition, Maren Cooper. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and Happy New Year. This is actually my first Zoom event about Finding Grace. The book came out in July, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do a live event and celebration then. And I've talked about the book at various bookstores and other venues, even did an Instagram live, which was quite wild. And but this is my first Zoom event, so I'm very excited about it. And how do you like my backdrop? I've got my book featured here. I've got other books. Actually, I've even got Marcy Rendon's books in my background because I've got all three of her Black Bear books. So good for you guys to have her next week or next month, you said, right? Yeah. So great. So, and I have to say, Zoom is kind of custom built in Minnesota in the winter, right? I mean, who knew whether we were going to have one of those new, ice attacks or the snow blizzard that we've had in the last few weeks. It's been quite the winter already. So I'm happy that we're cozy and warm and able to do this way. I'll try to avoid Zoom fatigue, which is the only issue that we ever have on Zoom. Especially since Ben is keeping track of our tech here. So I'll try to keep things interesting over our time, and I'm happy to have you think of questions that I will actually take at any time, but I'm happy that I'll be tracking them through chat, or somebody will be, so thank you for that. So as I was preparing for today, I had to think back to how it came about. And I think it was Gillette, well, I know it was Gillette, who discovered the book on the Midwest Booksellers newsletter and asked for an advanced reader copy, read it, evidently liked it enough to suggest it to you all. And so that's how it came about. And I'm happy that BookEnds Online decided to invite me. I'd like to thank Gillette and Travel and Storyteller, Lena Pilar from the Wadena County Historical Society, and the Five Wings Arts Council for funding BookEnds Online. And Shelley, thank you for moderating today.
Oh.
Okay, I'm going to start with description of the book, and then I'm going to do 2 or 3 or even more excerpts, because I don't know. This book is told from all 3 of my point of view characters. So I want to give you enough of a feel so that you are enticed to either read it or read it again or suggest it to a friend. How's that? So, but a little bit about Finding Grace. First of all, it's a family saga. It's one family story over a generation or so. And as I said, there are 3 point of view characters, but the lead narrator is Charlie. The book is categorized as contemporary fiction, women's fiction, small town fiction, a coming of age story, And all of those things are true. I will warn potential readers, or those of you who have already read it know this, it can be a tough read. It's very emotional, gut-wrenching, heart-rending, but it's also described as beautiful, a tribute to unconditional love. My advice is don't stop in the middle. It's worth getting to the end. So I'd like to start with the hook of the story, and there's no spoilers here, but I will kind of describe what's already on the cover of the book. Charlie and Caroline meet in college biology lab and drift into a relationship of his design. Mesmerized by her drive, Charlie sees in Caroline, an orphan like himself, a partner who will help him face the world. Charlie couldn't be more wrong. He wants a home, a family, roots. But Caroline, a gifted ornithologist, plans a life of travel and adventure, following her heart's desire and her birds, wherever they may take her. And she expects Charlie to tag along. When Caroline gets pregnant against her wishes, Charlie assumes she will change her mind. She doesn't. Their daughter, Grace, falls through the devastating schism that grows between her parents. When Grace finally runs away, everything becomes a bargaining chip in a very high-stakes game. Caroline is a very bold, unapologetic character. She follows her own nature and holds Charles to his promise to parent their daughter without her help, an arrangement that allows her to travel the world and follow these birds wherever they may take her. But it's an uneasy truce that results in near tragedy for their daughter, Grace, who comes of age in a household full of toxic resentment on one side and suffocating love on the other. Grace increasingly struggles with her mental health as she grows older. The story is told by those three characters, and it's set against the backdrop of Lake Superior on the North Shore. It's a piercing chronicle of the struggles and eventual insight gained by each over the years, starting with Charles and Caroline's courtship and continuing into Grace's early adulthood. So it's a poignant coming of age story for both Grace and her parents. I'm going to start with reading the first chapter, which follows the prologue and sets up the story. But first, I'm going to silence my phone because I already heard it chirp. So there we go. Chapter 1, Finding Grace, Kearney, Nebraska, spring 1996. Not the most romantic place to propose, but Charles Booker knew it fit Caroline perfectly, a rugged bird blind in Nebraska just before dusk. It was an amazing sight. The sandhill cranes swooped in with their long necks cutting through the sky, their bodies aligned, following as sharp as knives against the backdrop of the twilight sky. Shh, I need to block everything out for this moment. Carolyn shushed him as he crouched down beside her, his feet scattering the gathered leaves on the concrete floor of the blind. He thought, not for the first time, how most men would feel diminished if the woman in their life had a passion so obviously beyond them. But Charlie was awed by Caroline and her brilliant mind. He was just grateful to be in her galaxy and let the energy around him envelop him. They had waited for hours, and this moment wouldn't last long. At twilight, the noisy, raucous sandhill cranes landed by the hundreds, squeezing in without disturbing their colleagues who had already landed. As the night turned completely dark, the birds' loud cries continued, unabated, while the final stragglers found their night's home. Charlie hoped the afterglow of this wonder would serve to keep Caroline in a state of euphoria long enough for him to get the words out before she reverted to the scientist focused on her next challenge. And who knew if that would include him? Caroline finally put the binoculars down and lowered her body onto the bench. With her raven black curls tightly pulled back into her hat, she looked like a high school kid, even at 25. After a long, delighted exhale, she jumped up, pulled him to her by his jacket, and gave him a deep kiss. "We did it, Charlie. Did you love it? Can you believe it? Is there anything as beautiful as the migration of the sandhill cranes?" It was incredible, just as you said. He wrapped his arms around her in a bear hug and felt her warmth before plunging ahead, before he lost his nerve. "But to me, beauty is you, now, in your element, and love is what we have together, and will have forever." As he spoke, he lowered her to a seated position on the bench and went down on one knee. "Caroline Lee Tate, would you share your life with me and be my wife?" His words tapered to a whisper as Caroline started to laugh. "Charlie, you silly man, what are you doing?" She took his face in her hands and gave him a quick kiss. He knew Caroline well enough not to expect a conventional response to a proposal of marriage. So he held his position on one knee and deftly pulled a little box from his jacket pocket, trying to hide his terror that she would persist in thinking this a joke. Caroline eyed the box. "Oh, Charlie, you know marriage isn't my thing. I don't think you'd be happy with me. I'm made for the life of a mad scientist, a nomad, wandering the world and discovering its secrets, not playing housewife." "Caroline, I don't want a housewife. I want you. I want you as you are, wanderer, inquisitive explorer. We were meant to be together. Don't you feel that?" Caroline bounced up and walked around the blind, pausing to pick up her binoculars and check out a few straggling cranes. Charlie gave her a few minutes. Then he approached her body from behind and put his chin on her shoulder, waiting for her body to relax as he put his arms around her and rocked her from side to side. "Caroline?" "Charlie, you know feelings are hard for me, but I do feel good when you're around." She lowered the binoculars and turned to him. "You're serious?" "I am serious. I want you as you are. I promise. I love you." Charlie sealed the deal with a passionate kiss, hoping he left her wanting more, and ushered Caroline into their Jeep rental. The celebratory dinner and night of lovemaking boosted his confidence that he could successfully compete for her attention. So that kind of begins it all. So not the most convincing acceptance, I don't think, but that does get them going. So I'd like to also just tell you that before I read this next excerpt, which will be again in Charlie's voice, this young couple does indeed get married and move to the North Shore of Lake Superior, to my fictitious version of Two Harbors. So you know kind of where it is, north of Duluth. So let me read the next excerpt. If I can find it. Oh, here we go. Okay. January on the North Shore of Lake Superior. Cold that penetrates your bones. Below zero temperatures that freeze the lake out 50 feet or more most years. Whipping wind that reminds you that your windows are old and need to be replaced. One night, Charlie came in from a frigid walk with Abigail, their dog, and was pulling off his boots when Caroline called to him. He walked into the bedroom and found his bride in fingerless gloves, reading a book with the pillows bolstering her up and only her head peeking out of the piles of blankets atop the bed. "I'm cold. Please come to bed and keep me warm." Well, that's not an invitation I can refuse. He was quickly in his boxers, ready to head her way. She closed her book and turned out the light. "Oh, Charlie, I forgot to take my pill. Would you bring it to me? It took me 10 minutes to get my feet to thaw in here." "Okay, so where am I looking? In the medicine chest, the little reel, right?" Yes, it's the next number in order, thanks. Charlie found the birth control pills easily, but stood stock still, gazing at the wheel. Do you think we made the wrong decision to replace the furnace before the windows? Would that have made a more comfortable January for us, do you think? Caroline's voice came through. It took him a minute to see that they were similar in size to the low-dose aspirin. Sorry, what did you ask, Caroline? It took him another minute to check his conscience. He badly wanted a family, and he knew Caroline needed one too. She just didn't know it yet. Both of them had an emptiness to fill. Wouldn't this one act be viewed as worthy to get them there? He quickly dispelled an uninformed worry that he could be caught in this potential betrayal. So that is rightfully called betrayal. And let me just talk to you a little bit about my inspiration from the lake. As you know, I've got a lake place there. I write from the lake a lot and have always been kind of bewitched by Lake Superior. And so one of my inspirations to write this story came from wanting to tip my hat at the lake, which I've enjoyed for so many years, and so many Minnesotans do. So, but then I needed to conjure up a fitting story. The lake is dramatic. You know, I wanted to come up with something that would be fitting for that. The second part of my inspiration was that I often take a class, a writing class. You can take so many writing classes online these days, but this one haunted me from a long time ago. I can't even remember when I took it, but it was about unreliable narrators and unconventional characters. And so you think murderers, you know, nasty people, and sometimes a child's voice can be an unreliable narrator. So I thought about that, rejected a few notions, and settled on a unique, bold character who lacked even a hint of self-awareness, a character who defied convention and was extremely difficult to categorize, a character who, when displayed on the page, would be untraditional at best and unreliable at worst. Finding Grace is the story of this character's effect on others. So I just wanted to talk about my inspiration before I go on to now read an excerpt in Caroline's voice. The unconventional, bold character. Some readers have found loathsome. So I'll let you be the judge of that. Charlie, Caroline screeched again with everything her swollen body could muster, and finally he came to her. Caroline, darling, what is it? I'm here. He opened the shower door, ready to rescue her from whatever peril she was in now. Where were you? I needed you. Caroline stood in the steady stream of warm water, hair plastered to her head, stark naked with her belly stretched around the beach ball, soon to be their child. Charlie placed his hand on her shoulder and softly said, I'm here now, Caroline. I took Abigail out for a quick walk. What do you need? I dropped the shampoo and can't pick it up, and it's all your fault. Caroline spit out the words. Okay, I see that's a problem. He kicked off his shoes, grabbed the shampoo, and leaned into the shower. Let's get this done before we run out of hot water. So sorry, babe. He gently worked shampoo into her hair, caressing her scalp and whispering in her ear, I'm here now. Caroline soaked up his tenderness as her due, without regard to the fact that he was now totally drenched. I'm carrying your child, Charlie. Abigail's a dog. I'm your wife, she spat out. And I'm taking care of both of you? and Abigail, and will take care of the baby too. And I only have 2 hands and 24 hours a day. Charlie's voice sharp but controlled through gritted teeth. Give me a break, Caroline. She glared at him and scrambled out of the shower, clumsily reaching for a towel while water dripped from the contours of her body, leaving a pool of water on the floor. As Chuck stripped off his clothes and cleaned up the bathroom, she climbed into bed and reflected about her situation. How did this happen? She hated being pregnant, not celebrated for her intellectual contributions, because she was a female beast with a burden. She hated it. Her natural tendency to fight back, to show them all, to win regardless of the odds, shaken by her own self-doubt. She had been mortified when her colleagues started a baby pool and collected money in a piggy bank for a bet on the birth date, giving each a reason to size her up each day for whether she would go their distance. But the worst was when a disgusting junior faculty member actually patted her stomach as if her baby bump was community property. She couldn't count on her body now, not only cumbersome in these last days of pregnancy, but a little muddled. Her energy sapped by taking a shower, humiliated by not being able to bend down to pick up a dropped bottle. And would she get through it? The birth itself with its blood and gore, the rituals that came with it were bad enough to endure. She had turned down an offer of a baby shower, but still people persisted to drop off gifts to her office, now sitting in a pile on the top of the piano bench. She felt the warmth of Chuck's body as he joined her in the bed and spooned her from behind, evidently sorry for his show of anger. You're cold, get away, Caroline growled, still annoyed by his outburst. I'm cold and need to warm up by my red-hot wife, Charlie soothed. Caroline half-heartedly back-kicked him. Get away from me until you can tell me you're able to have this baby yourself. He cuddled her and nibbled her ear. Wouldn't that be something? Man bears child after wife pregnant for 9 months. His chuckle started as a low rumble as he patted her stomach and kissed her shoulders and neck. Her body always the key to changing her mood. Caroline finally giggled as she allowed herself to be comforted by the only man she had ever conquered. You would if you could, I know, Charlie. Damn straight, woman. He molded his body to hers, and her breathing slowed. Caroline, your due date is only a week away. Caroline felt her body tighten. Don't remind me. Are you scared? No, I know you'll be there with me. She hesitated slightly. And 4 weeks after that is my next birding trip. That's what keeps me going. She felt his body shift slightly away from her. Caroline, let's just keep that as a hope and not a certainty. You may not. Charlie, you promised, and I'm holding you to that. He had promised he would do all that to keep whatever it took to keep her on her own track and not be sidelined by a baby. She wasn't sure what that would take and didn't want to know. That was his problem. So now the plot thickens. She's had the baby. He's promised to take care of the baby. So the last reading, and then we'll stop and either take questions or I'll talk a little bit more about my writing journey and leave some gaps there. And this one is from Grace's point of view, which I thought was maybe important for you to hear. And this is actually chapter 18 from the book itself. But just let me... Two Harbors, winter 2006. Grace crept down to the floor in her parents' study, sat cross-legged, and carefully placed the sheaf of photos on the Turkish rug just beyond her mother's pictures. From her last birding trip, prohibited, but so pretty, the colors so vibrant, Grace couldn't help herself. She barely dared to breathe. It was Abigail who gave her away. The sound of her claws on the wooden floor morphed to a slow dog exhale as she lowered her aging body to the comfort of the carpet beside Grace and put her muzzle in Grace's lap. Abigail, shh. Get out of here, girl. You're going to get me in trouble. But Grace was all bark. She leaned down and put her forehead on the dog's head and patted her on her back. Aren't they pretty? Gracie, her father's voice called from the hallway. Grace, where are you? She considered a getaway attempt. With Abigail, though, she knew it was impossible. She put the photos under the edge of the rug and gave herself up. In here, Dad. Ah, there you are. I see you have a friend with you. Her dad bent down to tousle her hair and give Abigail a pat. So what you doing in here? Nothing. Grace gave him her most angelic smile. Charlie sat next to them on the rug. Find any dust bunnies under your mom's desk? Nope. The less said, the better. In her 10 years of life, Grace had learned this truth with anything related to her mother. Did you come in here to find a book? Her father's voice was as soothing as Abigail's fur. No. Well, as long as you're here already, would you like to sit at my desk and check out my study plans for next semester? Or help me record grades in my record book? Can I help record grades? Grace bounced up so fast that Abigail was forced to move quickly as well. As she did, the force of her body weight moved the rug, and a corner of a photo peeked out from under it. Grace saw her father look down and didn't dare follow his gaze. He bent down and lifted the corner of the rug, retrieving the bird photos from beneath it. What have we here? He looked at the photos. Sweetheart, you know your mom doesn't want you messing with her stuff, right? Grace looked down at her feet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she mustered the courage to ask, Dad, why doesn't Mom let me look at her stuff? I'm not little anymore. I just wanted to see the bird pictures from her trip. Why can't she share them with me? Her dad seemed to choose his words carefully. Hey, baby, your mom just wants to make sure the pictures are carefully preserved for her books and lectures, that's all. His voice was warm, but not convincing. Dad, will Mommy ever love me? Gracie. Her dad put his hands on her cheeks and bent down to her eye level. Your mom loves you. Of course she loves you. No, Dad, she doesn't. You love me. She barely puts up with me. Oh, Gracie. Her dad hugged her tight. Your mom has a hard time showing her love. Gracie had seen enough over her years to know her mom loved her dad and showed it all the time with affection. She even patted Abigail once in a while, but she barely touched Grace. Grace wasn't good enough for her mom. Will I ever be? So that's poor little Grace at age 10. So I've kind of built up the story, given you some perspective on each of the characters and from their point of view. But I only got you to chapter 18, and there's 40 some. So that is the description of the story and what I thought I would trot out. What would you like to do next? Are there questions, or should I just keep talking about my writing process, etc.? What would you prefer?
Well, we have some questions coming in, and some of the questions that I generally ask do have to do with the writing process, because I always like to find out what a writer's process is. But the first question was, in Finding Grace, there's a lot of growth and change in the characters of Charlie and Grace. However, Caroline does not seem to grow or become more self-aware through the years. Why did you make that choice for this difficult character?
It's an excellent question, and I've got lots of different angles from which I can answer it. But first of all, let's just all know let's just get to this honest place of, we all know characters that don't have any insight into their own behavior. Some of them can change, some of them don't. I was very careful in this book because it does, it does have some mental health descriptions, some personality disorder descriptions, but I didn't want to label them too tightly. And I was careful not to, I'm not a diagnostician, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, but clearly Caroline shows narcissistic tendencies. She's never been diagnosed, at least from my perspective, telling the story. And nor would she ever think that she needed to be. That's just who she is. And I think she's gotten through life partly emboldened by Charlie, who had this open wound as an orphan and felt that she, as an orphan, also needed him. So they came into that somewhat dysfunctional relationship, and she just rode it for all it was worth. And as readers get to the later portions of the book, they will see more characteristics of Caroline show up. But, and there is one part of the book where she's got a dream sequence that I'm not going to talk about much, that has her at the closest moment of insight that she's capable of. And I'll leave it at that, because I am totally aware that the other two characters do have a narrative arc and a lot of growth. Caroline is just who she is. So thank you for that question, though.
Although I haven't finished the book. Gillette has it for me. So I'll borrow her copy. But it seems to me, though, that it's almost, I mean, I get it, but maybe it's because of where I am in my life, but I kind of feel bad for Caroline because she was honest about who she was and what she wanted to do and what mattered to her. And she was duped into having a child she said she didn't want, and forced to try to be something she said she wasn't interested in being. So it almost seems unfair to make her the complete bad guy when, to my way of thinking, Charlie seems awfully manipulative in his love and want for the traditions of family and so forth, because he tricked her and didn't listen to what she was telling him about who she was and what she was capable of. I mean, could that be argued?
Oh, not only argued, but a clear point of view. I've done a few book clubs, and I have to say, we can get into kind of some really good arguments about this. But, the perspective of, hey, Caroline, she is who she is. She probably, if she had any insight, she might have been able to recognize her own limits and live the life according to that. She didn't want it. She didn't think marriage was for her. She didn't think motherhood was for her. And so Charlie, who wanted all of those things that she didn't want, pushed the issue, and betrayal is the only way you can describe that. And yet people have a hard time considering him anything but a hero in how he saves their daughter. So the whole thing is kaflooey in that way.
Mhm.
But absolutely, she's a woman who perhaps knew her limits, at least had opinions about how she wanted to live her life. And she was duped. Absolutely. So we can't really blame her for being who she was and being honest about it. There's a part of this book that, well, I'll just tell you, I clearly believe in a woman's opportunity to choose. She didn't have an opportunity to choose. So that's, a little bit of a subtext here. So you absolutely got the right message. That is a message. I also can look at the story from, thank God for Charlie. After the fact, he basically, and it was a weak moment in which he said, well, then I'll do it all. I mean, what did he mean by that? Neither of them had a family of origin where they understood healthy relationships growing up. So he had no idea what it meant to raise a child. Maybe in foster families, he knew how not to, but he did not have, and nor did she. She was the single child raised by an elderly uncle. So you have just this, odd coming together of these people. And Charlie, who got his way and was forever, therefore, saddled with having gotten his way. And so the way he handles it, I believe people think of as admirable. And so, but it's clearly there is a betrayal that gets to them to that point.
Yeah.
That's what
It
makes
also
it.
seems that, yeah, that often when men do things like take care of their children or this or that, even though they wanted the home and the family and the kids, when they do it, it's admirable. But a woman does it, it's like, well, that's what women are supposed to do,
Yeah.
And then what did you do in addition to this?
Right.
It just seemed like playing with society's impositions of how people should be instead of saying, hey, she told you this is what she wanted in her life. Why are you mad at her for living the life she told you she was going to be living after you insisted?
Right. You're absolutely right. The one thing to remember here is that both of them are unique and isolated. They don't have social networks on their own. When you read the book, you notice that there wasn't an engagement party. No friends were aware of any of that. So they didn't even have that to cushion or moderate some of their opinions, which, I don't know how realistic that is, but that's the way I chose to portray it. Partly to expose some of those stereotypes and have people have this kind of a conversation.
I thought for Charlie that he didn't really end up doing it all by himself. I don't know how to. I don't want to do spoilers, but in a sense, his journey is a series of being rescued in a sense, and that's where his personal growth doesn't come from inside.
Right.
It comes from the relationships that he eventually forms, and where he gets in a sense is able to travel his redemptive path, but it's because he is rescued by forming relationship networks. He does not do this all by himself. There's a very clear message, I think, in your book that you cannot actually parent a child, even as a single parent, all by yourself.
Right. Right. The old saw, it takes a village. Thank you for that, Gillette. And, remember, and you've read the book, I know, Caroline repelled social intimacy. Charlie eventually welcomed it. And pivotal to that was, of course, the caregiver that he needed to have, Lori, as well as the small town doctor who befriended him, recognizing the issues that Charlie was dealing with. So you're right. I would say he was reluctant, but eventually open to it. And therefore that fostered the growth in him that saved both he and Grace.
And here's an opening for you, Shelley. It's definitely an indicator of Charlie's ability to form relationships was the fact that he had a dog.
Well, I'll also say a cat might have worked as well, because I have a cat.
Dogs, yeah, I have cats myself, but I'm a dog trainer too. So
Okay.
Cats allow you to stay home more though, and dogs sort of force you to go outside.
That's exactly
because at the very least they need exercise and go to the bathroom, and then everybody sees you with the dog and assumes, oh, there's an opening there. The dog makes it easier to interact with people.
Good conversation starters. Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
No, and I enjoy the books that are told like when there's multiple characters and then everybody gets to tell. I love those kinds of books. I was wondering why did you choose that rather than just like telling the story solely from one, like Charlie's point of view or Caroline's or Grace's?
well, that will get me into the writing journey. So I'll talk about that. This book, my first book came out in 2019, and it was told from one person's point of view. And again, the lake inspired me and this strange character that I was going to develop. So, and drama, emotional is where I was going. And I developed the characters and then I let them go. That's kind of the way I write. And so it took me, this book has been going on for a long time. And as I developed those characters and decided, Charlie, of course, is the narrator. He's the main narrator, but I couldn't, how would you have had him describe? I didn't, I got locked into, I can't have him describe Caroline and not have her have some voice. That would have been even more difficult to believe. I mean, Caroline, I think for some people is unbelievable. I kind of over dramatized it perhaps, but I was trying to make that point. So I just didn't think that that perspective would have been able to do justice to what I wanted to do with that character. So, and then when you decide that, and then of course I had this child who I didn't really have her own voice until she was, well, I think the first time she actually shows up on the page in her own point of view is probably right around that chapter that I just read, chapter 18, when she's 10. She's probably quoted earlier than that, but I wanted, because it becomes her story. And so I didn't want that to be, and especially given the fact there's an absence, she and her father are not always together. I couldn't cover that without. So, and I'm a newcomer to writing. So for an author to realize, well, okay, if this is the story you want to tell, and that's, how do you do that? So that took me a long time to figure out. Many notebooks of ideas and conversations with people. And so I think I had a conversation with a developmental editor who helped me think about how to blend it, because it's a blended narrative and it takes place over many years. So that's how I came to a prologue, and then, the first part of the story, and then the prologue. The activity in the prologue foreshadows something that comes up later in the book, and then we go from there. So it was complicated. This was not an easy story to write. And I do think, I actually, with my beta readers, I was a little nervous that would be too complicated, but people just, got it. I think doing the prologue and then catching it up later was the right way to do it. And I do stand by the decision to have the 3 point of view characters. And by the way, for people who haven't read the book, or I did an audiobook. And so that was just fascinating because I produced it myself. Well, I should say it's my development through a producer that I chose. And I got to choose the narrators, which is a lot of fun. There's no way that I would ever read my own book, partly because I lose my voice. But secondly, I don't have the same kind of tenor that I think you need. And so it was really fun to think about, well, how would Charlie come across? How would Caroline come across? And then for Grace, I needed to have kind of a younger voice that could get to early 20s. So that was a lot of fun. So
Cool. Yeah. No, I've actually come across quite a few books that have done that. And I think sometimes it's one person's story. But this seems like it was three people's stories. So how could you rely on one person? I think it makes it better almost to hear the different perspectives because it gives you as the audience a chance to see them all as they see themselves as well as how others see them.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Thank you. I was happy with the choice.
yeah, I always like that because it's a little bit more complicated at first, but then you really start to appreciate, especially if the writer definitely makes it like the voices come through
Mhm.
in this way that you can definitely hear the child, the woman, the man. So
Right.
cool. You said you came late to being a writer. So where did you start that did you want to always and it just life got in the way, or is this something that
No, I never ever had it on my ambition list or anything. But I have been a lifelong reader. And
Mhm.
um, from an early age, I was kind of fascinated with how do people do this? I just didn't get it. So, but I had a very busy life and career. And after raising the children and doing my career to the hilt, and getting to a point of burnout and leaving a little earlier than many do, I had time. And after I cleaned all my closets and did all those kinds of things, I let myself breathe a little bit and wanted to figure out, well, what am I going to do for this next chapter of my life? And that just opened up possibilities. And so I'm lucky that I live in the Twin Cities, and the Loft Literary Center, who some of you probably know about, is here, and we're fortunate to have it. It's been here for a long, long time. I remember it when I was at the U of M, being on close to campus there, and it's now down in Open Book, which is a literary center on Washington Avenue in Minneapolis. And so I just, somewhere along the line decided to take some classes so I could appreciate how people did it. And I did that to the point that when you are sitting in a classroom with other people, and you've got a teacher who is really interested in engaging with people, they often asked all the students to write. And so therefore you can't just sit there anonymously for very long. You've got to show something, and that's what you talk about in the class. And so that went on for quite some time, and I was quite shy about it and hesitant. This whole concept of the author's voice just was way over my head. But I did eventually get to the point where I felt comfortable. And when you have a cohort of people that you're mingling with, and they're trying things out, etc., you pick things up along the way. So somewhere in that process, the Loft brought in for people who had something that was a work in progress, namely a novel or some fiction piece, memoir or whatever. They have a program where they brought in agents for the purpose of sitting down with potential people ready to pitch their book. And so, since so many of my friends were doing it, I thought, well, why not? And did it. And it was very eye-opening about how difficult it is to publish and how tight things are relative to your preparation for something like that. But I did learn how to write a query letter that would go out to agents. And I also learned how to do an elevator pitch. And I can't remember right now what the time was that you had in order to pitch to the agent, but it was short. I want to say maybe a maximum of 3 minutes. So you have to hone whatever it is you're trying to hook somebody into. And so that was quite eye-opening. And yet I was, being an adventurous. So I did it. And I think I had 5 different agents, one of whom wasn't at all dealing with my genre, which at that point for the first book was women's fiction. And so of those 4 that, talked to me about it, I think I had somebody ask for the first chapter to be sent to them. And a couple, I think somebody asked me for the first 50 pages. And so I thought, well, that wasn't so bad. And so encouraged, but not silly, I decided to play with that notion for a while. And so for the next 4, 5, 6 months, I sent my query letter to agents that I had to explore to find out, where in the world do these people, how do you do this? And so that in and of itself was a lot of work to find agents that might represent something that you would ever have the option to try to sell them. And so again, you're kind of caught in this wheel of sending stuff, waiting for a response, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you know what? I didn't want to spend a lot more time doing that because I would rather have written by then. I wanted to write. I didn't want to spend time on the business end of it. So as I was pursuing what do I do next, I came across She Writes Press from a colleague and writer friend who had just been accepted by She Writes Press, which is a hybrid publisher. And a hybrid publisher does all of what you want a publisher to do, but they share the risk. And so you put some money down, they put some money down, and then you share the royalties eventually. So I thought that was kind of a nice way out of the rigmarole of trying to find an agent who, if you get an agent, that means basically they have to sell the book to a publisher. So you're skipping a step by not having the agent, and you're getting to a publisher who you feel is good. And She Writes Press has been around now for 10 years. And when I signed with them, they were a little younger, but I feel pretty good about them, good enough so that I have them representing book number 2, Finding Grace, as well as book number 3, which will be out in November of 2023. So again, I didn't want to spend more time on the business of sorting it out. I'm late in life doing this. I didn't want to spend all of that decade trying to figure that out. So I've been pretty happy with them. They also come with distribution through Ingram, which is the gold standard. So you can't really do much better than that, right, Gillette? Right. So
I was going to say, one of the really good advantages of this particular hybrid publisher that you chose is that it's available through Ingram at the regular full wholesaler discount, and the returnability that is one of the hallmarks of having one of the privileges of having a bookstore. One of the most difficult parts to get independently published, completely self-published authors to understand is that their books are not available through distribution at a discount, and they're not returnable.
Right.
And so the risk there. So yes. It's a really
yeah, I appreciate that viewpoint, because that's exactly why it made sense to me to do that as a value add, as opposed to spending several years trying to find an agent, which would have taken away from writing time. So I've been happy. I think the other thing that as a Minnesota writer, I've been willing to do, and I think it's paid off for me, and Gillette, I'll like your opinion there, is when I was trying to sort out how in the world to market A Better Next, which was my first book, I was lucky enough to get Faith Sullivan to blurb it. Well, Faith is a well-known Minnesota author, women's fiction, and she was so gracious and so helpful. She came to an event of mine, gave me a lovely blurb and just encouragement. I remember when she agreed to do it and sent the blurb, and she doesn't use a computer, by the way. So she's typing this. So she sent me a comment that I still keep, and I'm going to quote it close, I think. "Make no mistake, my dear, you are a novelist." And that just, wind under my sails and kept me going. So, and then for the second book, I got up my nerve and approached, actually, by then I had met both William Kent Kruger and Alan Eskens, both authors who I read diligently and love. And so actually Kent Kruger doesn't live very far from me. And, he's kind of the model citizen for authors because he's so generous. So he read it and gave me what I consider to be a really lovely blurb. And Alan Eskens read it. And now Alan, this is just kind of a funny story, and I bet we're getting close to time, but Alan, Kent asked for the advanced reader copy, which of course is the best way to read when you're doing that. But Alan, I didn't have the advanced reader copies when I reached out to Alan Eskens. So he was willing to take the entire manuscript, just copied. So I sent it to him in the middle of the pandemic and he read it. So I am forever grateful for both of them for taking the time to read it and being generous in their blurb. So it's been fun.
Cool. And I can see the covers from here, and as a bookseller myself, they're really not like some self-published things. Those look like they could have come from Random House or Penguin. Right. They're well done. And I know too. Yeah, and going through something like Ingram also means you can get into things like Barnes and Noble as well as the independent bookstores, which makes a difference for an author because I worked for them for a while too.
I was really fortunate with the Midwest booksellers because I've gotten in a lot of their bookstores and have made myself available. But, let's face it, a lot of books are bought online. But my local Barnes and Noble is carrying it. Several others are. So second book out, better than the first. And, my third one will be out and maybe that'll be easier for me yet. So who knows?
Yeah. Well, it also, I find, just because I used to do a lot of work with the authors who came to our store, and we weren't in a major market like Minneapolis, which is actually kind of great because the book selling culture out here is, a lot of people, there's a lot of books in the East Coast where I'm originally from, but I just find that people, well, maybe just because it's the Midwestern, like we're all in this together. It's freezing cold. We got to work together, make our lives work kind of ethos that's out here that makes it seem like everybody's really pulling for each other. But I know that we used to try to feature local authors and have local author sections because I knew a couple people from Rochester, like there's a children's writer, Sue Park. God, I'm forgetting her first name. But she writes a lot of really popular children's fiction and stuff like that. And she's from my hometown and a couple of other people. So we always try to help them too. But if somebody's self-published, they don't always sell the books because of how Barnes and Noble runs their company. But it makes a difference because not everybody goes to independence. Like here they have a really thriving and it's great, but other places it's like back in my hometown that most of the independents closed up and all we had after Borders closed was Barnes and Noble or Amazon. Right. So for a lot of people it makes it hard if they can't get their books into those venues to ever get found, and it seems a shame because voices like yours shouldn't be silent.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, Scout and Morgan is one of my popular places. Fitgers, I did an event there. Drury up in Grand Marais. And there's actually a very small bookstore in Two Harbors, which carries the book. And I've done a book event there at the library. So, and on the radio. So it's fun. I think cool. There's something in the chat. Should I look at it?
I think
or did you answer?
I did. We were just wondering if Faith, your friend that did the first book, was one of our early authors.
Oh, yes. Her books are The Cape May, Ruby and Roland is her latest one. And I don't think she's doing a lot of active writing now, but boy, she's just a lovely woman. And her books are, Ruby and Roland was quite a surprising book. It's the last one that I know she's written. And she's wonderful. If people are interested in a Minnesota writer, she would be right up there.
Yeah, I actually think we met her at a book conference because I have a copy of Ruby and Roland, and I just moved and I had to go through all my books. So I picked it up and I'm like, well, what is this? And I started reading it. It was really good. It stayed with me. It did not go in the sale pile.
It is good. It's a surprising book. I liked it a lot.
Yes. I know. I wasn't sure. And then I started reading. I was like, oh, it's sort of like Jane Eyre-esque.
Right. She's good. She's good.
Yes. It's a good book, and I kept it because I started reading it, and then of course I didn't get back to sorting my pile because I was on the couch reading, got halfway through the book, and I'm like, I think I'm going to keep this and finish it. So cool. All right. Well, it looks like we've reached our hour. You were amazing. Thank you so much. People should go check out your books. And hopefully someday if we get around to having that author event, we'd like to post-pandemic and preferably post-winter, because no one wants to go anywhere in a Minnesota winter.
That's right. And I should also just pitch book number 3. I'm going suspense. So it's a little different for me, and it's called Behind the Lies, and it's November 14th of 2023. So I got to get on that pretty soon.
Yeah, well, maybe we can have you back or have you come up to Wadena and then do a signing there and get everybody to come and get all 3 of your books.
I would be happy to. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm excited I'll probably go back and look at this on the Historical Society website. So thank you.